Hello, everybody. Welcome to Drunk with Questions. I'm Gooch.
And I'm Raj. Join us as we navigate the complexities of life. Here, alcohol may not be the answer, but it's sure as hell worth a shot.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Drunk with Questions, the talk show where ordinary people talk about extraordinary topics. Today, though, we are not going to be talking about anything extraordinary, or extraordinary, if you say it the right way, which I should. Today, unfortunately, we have some somber news. If anyone that's listening does not know, or is not from the United States, which I know we have some listeners that are not, unfortunately, my college that I graduated from, my alma mater, experienced a mass shooting on February 13th at around 8 p.m. When that happened, 3 people were killed instantly. 5 people remain injured at a local hospital. I was up most of the night, communicating a lot of that to teams and friends that I work with. And I believe the entire state, and especially the college campus, still to this day are reeling from the effects of something like that occurs. I will say that with the amount of shootings that have occurred in recent times, that this one has struck me the hardest. And I think a majority of the people here at Drunk with Questions that live in this area, that lived in Michigan, feel the exact same way. So with that, today, we have decided to have a very difficult conversation. A conversation that Drunk with Questions is tabled for, I think this is like our 18th episode. We've wanted to have this conversation, and it never felt right. And today was the right day. Today we felt like it was right. So with that, today we will be talking about gun control in the United States. I will preface this with the fact that, as always, we all respect each other. We are all friends. We may have different viewpoints, but we respect each other enough to know that every viewpoint is valid. And no matter what you feel, we hope that we represent your viewpoint as well, or something close to it. There is no right answer. There is no wrong answer. Everyone thinks that they have the opportunity to fix this, and the truth is that I don't think anybody does. So as we converse, and as we have these open, real, raw dialogue conversations that we don't hear on the news anymore, that we don't hear in college debates anymore, I hope that this community, the Drunk with Questions community, and anyone else that finds this podcast can appreciate the fact that there are still people out here that can have these tough conversations without going at each other's throats. With that, we're going to begin today's podcast. I have Tim, myself, I have Nick, Spicer, and Raj. Thank you for listening. And I think the first thing that we will start this conversation out with is, what do you personally feel is the right action? Should we continue to allow firearms in the US, or should they slowly be eliminated? And I'll start with Raj because I'm afraid to start with Tim.
That's a good choice. That's a good choice, Gooch. So let me start off by saying that this is not a conversation, like Gooch said, this is not something that we wanted to talk about. And unfortunately, it's gotten to the point where it is so common in our country that we are now being forced to bring up this topic of conversation because we know it's heavy. And we like to keep our podcast light and full of things that people could have conversations with your neighbor about, conversations with your spouse about, conversations with a stranger on the street. And this is one of those hot button topics that can get people fired up. And we wanted to have this conversation with the 5 of us, just to talk about it in a civil manner, so that way we can come to an understanding about what we think. Maybe sometimes our thoughts are held in this bubble, and until you share that thought or you get it criticized by another person, you won't really have any critical thinking applied to your thoughts and how you feel about something. So now that I've said that, let me start off by saying, in my opinion, for the longest time, I thought guns were the problem. I thought we have so many weapons in this country, and it seems every single time something like this happens, there's some lunatic with a weapon with high capacity magazines going insane and shooting up nightclubs, Bible studies, schools, elementary schools. And it's gotten to the point where we're numb to it. And I didn't think we would ever get to that point. I hear about another school shooting, or I hear about a elementary schooler shooting their teacher, and my first reaction is, wow. And that's about it. And that's where we've ended up as a country. Everyone's just numb to it. The day after the shooting, you listen to the media, it's the same spiel over and over again. We have Fox News telling you it's mental health. We have NBC telling you it's gun problem. Nobody has a solution. Everyone's just at each other's throats, blaming one side or the other. And nobody can offer a valid explanation to the families, to the victims, to the people that suffered from the trauma that happens. I mean, with these students at MSU, we have to understand that there are students at MSU that survived Sandy Hook. There are students at MSU that survived Oxford. These are people that have gone through two shootings at a place of education, at a place where they're supposed to be safe, at a place where they're supposed to be going through the developmental phases of their life and becoming who they are as adults. And we're now facing a situation in this country where nowhere is safe. Anytime you walk down the street, you're liable to get shot. If you're going to a county fair, you're liable to get shot. If you go to a parade, you're liable to get shot. So it's gotten to the point for me that gun control is not the answer. Now, there is a portion of gun control that I think that needs to come in place, and I think that has to be tied in with mental health. If you, for me personally, if you are showing signs of mental health issues, if you're showing signs that you could be harmful to yourself or people around you, you should not be able to own firearms. And I know that's a slippery it's a slippery slope. And I understand that, that could be, somebody could take advantage of that to take your rights away by claiming that you are having a mental episode. But the ramifications of not acting are so much higher than you being put under evaluation for a time being and then released and having your firearms back. I would rather take the risk of somebody, an innocent person, having their guns taken away for a couple weeks versus a school shooting happening, or having to watch a video of police, SWAT team going in full kit into a place of education, a place of worship, into an elementary school with babies inside, and wondering how many are dead. So I'm gonna leave the floor and let the rest of you guys talk. I just wanted to put my 2 cents out there for now. Of course, we'll get into more detail as we go along, but for me, it's a combination of both gun control and mental health, and it's not one or the other. It is not mutually exclusive. There can be an answer that is tied to both. So I'll let whoever wants to go next take it from here.
Yeah, I can
Yes,
go.
I'll have a. Okay, go for it, Tim.
And all right, so as my background image is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Right, the most basic, unalienable rights. To me, specifically, gun-free zones are a violation of right to life. Let me pull up findings from the Crime Prevention Research Center show that 97.8% of mass shootings over a 68-year period occurred in gun-free zones. Gun-free zones prevent an individual's right to self-defense, which allows their right to life. And that was between 1950 and May of 2018 was the 97.8% gun-free zones. Again, statistics from the Crime Prevention Research Center. Another thing, red flag laws do nothing to prevent gun crime from occurring. According to Do Red Flag Laws Save Lives or Reduce Crime, December 2018 by John R. Lott Jr. and Carlisle E. Moody, their summary concluded that they found a slight increase in murder and suicide in the immediate aftermath of red flag laws implementation, followed by a gradual decrease in both until they returned to pre-statute levels, indicating no significant change before or after red flag laws were conducted. And their research was compiled between 1970 and 2017 for similar laws enacted across all 50 states, including the District of Columbia. So part of that, me personally, when at my university that I attended, was living off campus at the time, apartment complex, and there was a mass shooting that happened within my city. Guy was randomly driving around, killing people, doing Uber trips in between, pickups and drop-offs. It was a horrific thing. I also worked in private security at that time and was posted at one of the local hospitals during the aftermath, just in case there was a copycat and to try and keep some of the news organizations out of the hospital. It's real. It hits home, especially now living in a closer area or proximity to Michigan State and having some background first responders. It's a huge thing. You never want it to happen. The unfortunate circumstances that occurred prior to it should have never happened. I think as far as gun laws go, the gun laws we have on books, I think last estimate varies by state, was approximately 22,000 firearm laws. Of those, none of which prevented any of these mass shootings from occurring. Again, gun-free zones, I think at the basis is a violation of human rights. And it's horrendous. I think mental health is at a basis, but I was reading more into the research about whether or not red flag laws actually do impact gun crime. People are afraid to lose their property. That's what they somewhat concluded from it. With the increase in suicides after the implementation of red flag laws, because they were afraid that their family would turn them in. So they decided to take action prior to them losing their own property. I think that's a definitely a huge thing, right? Like, we all have things that we like that we wouldn't want to give up. Yeah, we are, whether you like it or not, we're very materialistic people in the United States. Granted, there are current ways in which you can go through mental health help to lead to preventing someone from purchasing or possessing a firearm. Will it help all the time? No. Someone who's hell-bent on doing whatever they want to do will find whatever means necessary to do so. No laws in place, current future past would have unfortunately prevented any of these, shootings from happening. And I think that's horrific that citizens within the state who are law abiding, follow necessary licensing requirements, and have no criminal history should not be barred from carrying a firearm for self-defense and life preservation wherever they deem fit. I guess I'll kind of leave it at that. I mean, those are my core basis on firearm laws.
All right, I guess I'll take my turn on it now. I am obviously a pro-gun person, also to a certain extent. I very much have owned, used, trained with through my military experience, and had firearms, various natures. I don't believe that firearms make things inherently dangerous. It's the people that use them. Having been on both the, or more of the receiving end of a lot of firearm interactions, it's definitely a traumatic thing to go through. And that in and of itself is a mental health issue, and that you're going to have a lot of these people now that, as Raj said, have gone through 2 episodes, which is truly horrific for them. But in the same sense, I am a strong believer of you shouldn't have, or you shouldn't rely on somebody else to tell you you're safe. That's kind of your own charge, along the lines of what Tim said of your safety is your right. In the same terms, I believe that, at least in this particular instance, and a lot of what we've seen lately, gun-free zones and things of that nature, it's been a lot of, I guess, what some are calling a soft-on gun crime issue. Having this person been specifically cited for carrying a firearm on a previous instance, but was not given the mandatory sentencing in which is required in that instance. So that goes into, firearm laws are great and dandy as long as they are either upheld by the justice system or by the individuals themselves. It doesn't matter if one or the other doesn't follow the right lines of that. In his previous concealed carry charge, he was required to face up to 5 years in prison. Instead, was dropped to a lower charge and received 1 year probation. Specifics on that. That was back in 2019, I believe. Obviously, I'm a big proponent for mental health. Having had issues myself, I do believe that what's it? I do believe that mental health is it causes a lot of these issues, and then that the red flag laws can hurt some people with mental health issues that don't necessarily pertain to that. I know I've had my struggles with being a veteran, being a combat vet, in the sense of, I've sought counseling, I've had issues, and to some, I wouldn't want that to then take something away from me that gives me comfort. Because actually owning, carrying, possessing a firearm puts me in a place that I feel safe, because that's how I felt in the moment of, I have this is for me to protect myself, and I knew I could handle it. Whereas if you take that away from somebody, that could leave them more insecure than, putting them in a space that you're told is safe. And I think that's kind of a very large issue, is being told you're safe rather than, making yourself feel safe. I guess that's my spiel on things.
All right, I guess it comes down to me now. So my take on it, I mean, going back from when I was younger, growing up in the Midwest, like a lot of people, guns were, I mean, kind of a normal part of life in the sense of going out with family and to like at an appropriate age, learning how to shoot a shotgun, go trap shooting, hunting with friends and family. It's just a big part of life here in the Midwest. So I mean, I grew up around firearms to an extent. I was never to shy away from them. It wasn't like a foreign concept to me. But as I got older, I started exploring firearms of different types for different applications, maybe not just for like hunting and sport, but also for self-defense applications. And then, seeing how that also ties into eventually what I would want to do potentially as a career. So, um, when I was younger, maybe in high school or so, even early college potentially, um, I remember, thinking the first thought was, I don't know why the two sides of the aisle in the gun debate can't just come together and have a rational conversation with each other. It just seemed, at least from somebody that, didn't really like conflict, didn't really like to navigate conflict, wondering why people couldn't just have a civil discussion about it. And I get that there's heated emotions on both sides of it. Usually one from the side taking the stance of, well, how could you not think of the people that are impacted by gun violence? But then the other side also saying, well, how could you not think of the people impacted by removing the right to protect yourself? And then it just kind of came down to the point that there are people that are willing to have a reasonable discussion like we are right now about it. Even though I know most of us, like we're gun owners, like all of us here, but we're able to sit down and talk about these issues, whereas it seems like a lot of sides out there now just kind of get into a screaming match about it. As I've gotten older, it kind of just sits with me now that uh, as time goes on, I've become more and more pro gun because I see the benefits of gun ownership, whether it's coming from, I mean, personally, like it's part of it's a constitutional issue. I'm a big believer in the fact that the Second Amendment is there, what it says, what it stands for. We can talk about it later. There's been people trying to interpret it different ways, but to me, the text stands as it is. So there's the legal basis of it with the founding of this country, but also to the, looking into some of the statistics in the history of the fact that, gun control measures that have been implemented sometimes have either been repealed. They haven't lasted even in law. They've repealed certain laws that gun control is enacted. Otherwise, a lot of statistics show that gun control itself is not really the answer. It doesn't seem to have the large sweeping impact that people continue to think that it will. It's always a tragedy when these things happen. There's no easy way around it. Unfortunately, we live not only in a day and age where this is becoming more common, but violence against people, even on a large scale, isn't new in the history of humankind. The mechanism may be different. We have firearms now, and that mechanism has changed, but there have been issues with this throughout history of the violence against fellow man. To what scale? Sometimes there's more, sometimes it's less. There's so many examples that I couldn't even begin to start. But where I personally fall on it, and just to be perfectly clear, I do not think that gun control is the answer. I think that the benefit of the guns outweighs the negative in the sense that I don't think that the rights of the individuals in this country should be taken away or quote infringed upon to give some semblance of safety to somebody when the data really doesn't back that up. Now, in the vein of, excuse me, I know the mental health topic's been brought up, and we can kind of touch on that as this goes on. I won't dive too deeply into that now. While that is probably one of the only areas where I would consider some discussion on, but it would have to go with the caveat that if you start to basically make an argument that people exhibiting any kind of like mental health tendencies would have their guns removed from them, I think that's too slippery of a slope. I mean, by the CDC standards, more than 50% of people are going to be diagnosed with mental illness or a disorder at some point in their lifetime. 1 in 5 Americans will get a mental illness, experience mental illness in a given year, according to the CDC. So to me, there is too much of a risk there with the level of people that impacts to not have a lot of safeguards around that if we're going to talk about mental health being the catalyst for how we regulate guns. But yeah, obviously I'm not heartless in to these things that happen. Nobody wants to see this happen in this country. I just personally don't think that controlling firearms, especially with the measures that are usually proposed, or honestly not even proposed. Sometimes people say we need to control guns. We don't have an answer. We just need to do it. I don't see that as the solution. The people a lot of times like to refer to it as common sense gun control. I think that's misleading. If it was so common sense, then we would have come to a solution a long time ago and fixed this. I don't think there's an easy answer. I don't think it's, nobody really knows. Like I said, at this point, we would have figured it out, I think. I'll kind of leave some of the rest of my thoughts for elaboration throughout this as we discuss, but that's kind of just where I stand on that.
Okay, I guess it's my turn. I'm going to address two things. And, I have a lot of the same views as everybody that's here. Raj and I are both definitely very moderate, just on the different sides of the political aisle. So I'm not going to rehash the exact same thing. Although I do believe that banning firearms is not the right choice. I'll just say that straight out. So these are the two things that I'm going to address. The first thing I'm going to address is the fact that people believe that purchasing a firearm in the United States is easy. And I'm going to tell you, it's not. You cannot just walk into a shop, grab a gun, say, I want this. They beep like you would your milk, and then you walk out. There's paperwork involved, especially for handguns. There's extra paperwork. So if you have that idea in your head and you're listening to this right now, I want you to throw that out and just trust us that it is difficult. And if you don't believe us, tomorrow you can wake up, go to your local sporting goods store or wherever your firearms are sold, and ask them to purchase a firearm, and they're going to put a big white sheet of paper in front of you. It's called a Form 4473. And that is the form that you fill out for any purchase of a firearm at a shop or a qualifying event. In that, you'll fill out everything about you, your current address. Your address has to be on your legal ID, by the way, so you can't just have, if you have the little sticker because you moved recently, you have to have the sticker. It's mandatory. Most shops won't overlook that. So we're already running into like some straight up DMV, like what I want to say, roadblocks. After that, you'll identify yourself, and I'm going to read some of the questions on this Form 4473 that legally you have to answer truthfully. And if you don't, you can be charged with a misdemeanor. Are you the actual buyer for the firearm? The reason they ask you that is because there are people that will try to purchase firearms for other people. That is against the law. Are you under indictment or information in any court for a felony? That means that you may not have been charged for it yet, but are you literally charged with a felony right now that you're going through court for? If you answer yes to that, they cannot sell you a firearm. If you answer no and you are, that's against the law. Have you ever been convicted in any court of a felony? Well, when they run your background check, they're probably going to figure it out anyways, but you might as well just tell the truth there, right? Are you a fugitive from justice? They ask you that. Are you an unlawful user of or addicted to marijuana or any depressant, stimulant, narcotic drug, or any other controlled substance? The reason they put marijuana on there is because this is a federal form, right? Just because this marijuana is legal in your state, it does not mean it's legal across the entire United States. If you have ever been agitated as a mental defective, or have you ever been committed to a mental institution? Have you ever been discharged from the armed forces under dishonorable conditions? If you are dishonorably discharged, you cannot purchase a firearm in the United States.
It's the equivalent of a felony.
Yep. Are you subject to a court order restraining you from harassing, stalking, or threatening your child or an intimate partner or a child of such partner? Have you ever been convicted in any court of a misdemeanor crime of domestic violence? You list your country of citizenship. Have you ever renounced your United States citizenship? Are you an alien illegally or unlawfully in the United States? If you are, you can still purchase a firearm with a non-immigrant visa and some other things, but that's a lot of steps. So those are all questions that you have to answer legally, right? If you answer them untruthfully and it's found out, you could be liable for a misdemeanor. And let's be real, a majority of those questions that are the real red flags should be picked up in a background check. So that's the first form you'll fill out. If you purchase a pistol, you'll also fill out, what is it, an RI-60, right? So what that is that's basically saying, I purchased a pistol, you keep a copy, the place that sold it to you keeps a copy, and then you drop off a copy to some sort of a local agency. Generally, it's your county or your local police station. That way they know that you own the pistol. So, not easy, right? If you have a very common name like John Smith, sorry, man, you're not getting your gun that day. Even in very relaxed states where you don't have to go through 40 hoops just to get the firearm in your hand, a common name like that will generally put you on a delayed status, which means they have to wait for the background check to come through. And that can take, up to 7 days. Now, after the 8th day, you can have a firearm transferred to you in some of these less restricted states. And that's because if you think about what the Constitution says, and you have the right to bear arms, right? And you read it for face value there. That means that withholding the firearm from you because of the lack of the government's effort to figure out if you're legally allowed to own it or not, that's not your fault. So after the 8th day or 10th day, something like that, legally that place that's selling the firearm can transfer it to you whether or not your background check has come back. But if it comes back denied, right, what'll happen is the place will call you and say, hey, there was a small issue. If you bring your firearm to us, yada, yada, and then they'll immediately confiscate it. I am talking from experience. I know that's what'll happen. If the subject that got denied does not show up with the firearm, the local authorities are alerted, and whatever they do, they do. So, what I'm getting at is, there is a lot you have to go through in order to purchase a firearm, as far as a sale from a retailer to a private person. Now, in some states, we have private people sales, right? So 2 private parties can come together and transfer a firearm to each other. In unrestricted states, anything that's considered a long gun, so a rifle, a shotgun, right? Even ARs in some instances, those firearms can be transferred without any paperwork. And this is where everyone gets this gun show loophole thing from, okay? If you go to a gun show as a private seller, it's not a loophole. It's legal. I am allowed to look at your shotgun, say, hey, I'd like to buy that shotgun. And then we can go to your house. I give you some money. You give me the shotgun. We're good to go. That's the cold hard truth. However you feel about it, it doesn't matter. That's what they say you can do. With a pistol, you cannot do that. You have to go and get your fingerprints taken, and they do a background check for you at your local police agency or county sheriff, and you'll get an RI-60 for a private sale. You'll fill it out. The person that's selling you the pistol will fill out their part, and it's the same kind of thing as if you were purchasing it from a retailer. You get a copy, the person that sold it to you gets a copy, and you have to drop off another copy within 30 days. So then they still know that that pistol transferred hands. So, you know, long guns traditionally are used for hunting. Maybe AR style rifles, AKs, should go on to like the pistol transferring, if that would make people feel better. And frankly, I think I would be okay with that, just because it would make people feel like they're doing something, and that's fine with me. Although I don't think it would make any difference in what we're seeing now. But with shotguns, rifles being used for hunting, who really cares where those go? Most people don't use those for shootings anyways. At least not in recent times. The final point that I'll make, now that I've explained all of this to everybody that's listening and that cares, is I truly believe that if people want to hurt you, they'll find a way to hurt you. And so it doesn't mean, yeah, the US has firearms. We have a lot of firearms. If we tried to take them all away tomorrow, I promise you the bad guys would still be able to get them somehow. Okay? There's been plenty of countries that have tried to implement gun buybacks and everything like that. And although they may have succeeded, their crime rates generally go up. Australia is a really good example of that. But, you know, in Great Britain, we had the guy that ran around with the knife or a machete just a year ago or so. They have chemical attacks, right? In New York, just a couple days ago, we had a guy run over 8 people with a U-Haul truck. At the end of the day, the United States has a mental health crisis. They do not have a firearm crisis. These smaller countries like Great Britain, Germany, France, Spain, they have really, really good mental health laws where literally if like 2 people report you acting strangely, they can take you in for 3 days to evaluate your mental health. Now, some people see that as like a restriction of your freedom, and other people would be like, yeah, that's exactly what we need. I don't know what the answer is to that. What I do know is that they don't have near as many violent outbursts as we seem to have, but we're also a much bigger country that have much stricter privacy laws. And I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I don't think taking away the firearms is the answer. I'm not 100% sure that giving everyone a gun is the answer either. But that's pretty much all I've got to say right now. I'll open it back up to the floor.
All right. So we all covered our own thoughts on this crisis, and I think there's a lot of valid opinions between a lot of people. We all have our thoughts on it based on our life experiences and what we've seen out in the world and what we've experienced in our relatively short lives. All of us are under 30 for the most part. We are very young, and we've seen a lot in those 30 years. And I feel like the precedent for school shootings and mass shootings was set a long time ago. And, you know, you look back to Columbine, and that was like the real mainstream first time we had a school shooting where people went into a school with firearms and explosives and tried to harm people. I mean, Australia had the same issue with a camp, with a guy going crazy at a camp, and that's what caused their restrictive gun laws to take place. And you know, they acted swiftly on what they could do, and for the most part, they don't have mass shootings. They may have crime, but they don't have mass shootings to the scale that we see now. It's
No, they
very
just had
rare.
the highest domestic violence rate out of any first world country.
It's domestic violence that could be classified as anything. It'd be a husband hitting a wife, or it could be two people fist fighting, right? So it's what does that have to do with gun crime in terms of mass scale shooting? So
There's also
Correct.
been an increase
Yeah.
in rape.
same thing happens, I'm sure, in a lot of different countries.
No, I know.
mean,
I'm
that's
just saying.
rape
I mean,
has
it's-
existed as long as humans have. So that's not something that's going away just because of gun violence or taking away guns. People can rape you at knife point.
Well,
So
yes.
that's not gonna matter. But my point is, we have all these ideas of whether it's mental health or gun control, and we get to a point where we have to act at a certain point. We watched an elementary school full of kids get shot at. We watched that happen and thought, okay, something has to happen now. Then another one comes, and we think, okay, something has to happen now. And then another one comes, and now we're at a point where we're seeing 10 to 15 mass shootings of a large scale a year, and it's just something that we deal with now. We need a solution now. We need something implemented now. Even for Gooch, this hit close to home. Like, this is only 3 people that died, and I hate to say it that way because it doesn't devalue their lives. They are still people and they have value. It's not about how many people died, but we had a shooting where multiple small children died in a classroom. Teachers trying to protect the kids from a guy who was very young, owned a long gun because it's legal for him to own a long gun, not a pistol, went into a school and shot at him. And like, I understand the thought that you can't just take away people's guns because there's one bad apple, and the whole one bad apple doesn't, the saying is one bad apple ruins the batch. Okay, so we just need one bad apple to ruin it for everybody. And unfortunately, what would you be willing to give up to know that no more schools were going to be shot up? What are you personally willing to give up to say, okay, if we give up this right, if you want to have kids in the future and you send your kids to school, you know that nobody can go in there with an AR-15 and shoot it up. If we want to be that restrictive, because I mean, we can say that, you know, these cases, oh, they still have violence over there. Sure, violence is going to exist anywhere. But the method and the tools that you give to these maniacs will be restricted. Even now, I understand the argument that, oh, they can get guns wherever they want. Sure, how about we make it as hard as possible for them to get those weapons, instead of just saying, oh, they can just get it even if they have it.
I think the argument comes from, if we banned firearms, right? If we said, all right, everyone turn in your guns, only the good people will turn them in. The bad people will keep them, right? So then we enforce it, which you'd have to find the people to enforce it, which I'm not even going to go there.
Very small percent.
But let's
Very
assume that they find the people to enforce it and they do their damnedest. It's still going to be a huge black market, right?
Yeah, they wouldn't be able to find everybody.
Yeah.
They wouldn't be able to find even a fraction.
I mean, it's just, it's
We have the
insurmountable.
largest number of registered guns in the world. But I'm
So
sure we also
are we-
have the
are we
greatest
at a
number
point of no return?
unregistered arms
So
in the world.
Are we admitting to ourselves at this point in this country, we're at a point of no return?
We might as well just give everyone a fucking gun. Oh, I'll cut
So
that out.
here's the idea. Tim brought this up with there not being safe zones for gun-free zones, right? Are you trusting a college kid with a firearm? Fresh out of high school, going into college, should they be allowed to carry firearms on campus?
I was
And
18
see-
years old and had machine guns and was in a country full of people who may not have been bad, but I was told to
So-
determine
Yes, but
who
you
was
were
good and
under
who was bad.
you were under a strict military discipline. We're talking about kids that go to frat parties with firearms. You want to get that involved?
I
See,
mean, there's
You were in the
so-
military.
But
You had
people don't
repercussions.
understand what the military actually is. It's a bunch of frat boys
So
with guns
so
doing dumb shit.
that's your argument there is kind of not standing on any solid ground. So frat boys taking guns to frat parties, mind you, criminals don't follow laws anyways, right? You can't have any alcohol in your system while in the possession of a firearm.
Legally. Well,
legally.
correction.
I understand the law.
0.02.
I understand the
0.02.
law and how it works, but I'm also telling you that college kids are stupid. I'm also telling you
So
they're
are
at an age.
adults.
Yes.
So are
There was an
representatives
FBI
in
guy
government.
that dropped a gun at a party doing a backflip.
Yes,
You know,
and he should be fired for that.
Oh,
But-
absolutely. But
Yes,
he's an
and
adult
that's
with a
how it
firearm,
works.
trusted
Yes.
by
But
the government.
why should the individuals who are responsible be barred from protecting their right to life under the Constitution when those rights are stripped away in gun-free zones? So should the university be liable for those deaths? Should the elementary school be liable for those deaths? Or any other zone that prohibits firearms from being possessed because one responsible individual could have potentially made a difference? If that potential is as small as a rat's hair on its ass, that it could have stopped something, nothing should prevent that right law-abiding citizen from fulfilling that duty.
I can flip the script on you. If banning all guns gave us even a 10% chance that we don't have these shootings anymore, how
I
about
would
that?
still say no.
Exactly, that's your thought, but I'm telling you, as if I'm just flipping the argument against you. If you
Because-
have 1%, if one person could have stopped this shooting and there's a rat hair's chance that could have happened, I can say the same thing about banning guns.
So how about the Jews in Nazi Germany when Germans started requiring registration and then confiscation? Banning guns doesn't solve the problem. It's at a point where if you ban guns, yeah, criminals will always have them, right? We banned drugs in this country, and fentanyl's at an all-time high use, killing thousands of people. Drugs are flowing in the border or across the border freely, but it's still illegal. Fentanyl's illegal to possess without a prescription or as a doctor who can prescribe it. It still doesn't stop fentanyl use. You know, banning guns won't stop anything but preventing a law-abiding citizen from protecting themselves, their families, loved ones, friends from a mass incident.
Or you're
The
turning
location also matters.
But a firearm
Where in an
is
elementary
one of the greatest
school are you going to
equalizer.
have a firearm? I went to elementary school. I wouldn't trust any of the teachers that I had with a firearm.
Well, then this goes into then.
Is
you
every school
have-
need an armed person?
So we
Why
send
not?
$100 billion to Ukraine in weaponry, ammunition, all this other stuff to help them defend their country against an invading force. Yet we can't find the money to put at least one person in a school with a firearm who is willing to do that job. A responsible, law-abiding individual. You know how many former military personnel who have a duty to country and to protect children are prevented from doing such because of the gun laws that prevent them from doing that, or from Democrats and liberal ideology that says, oh, no guns, we shouldn't see this. No, they used to teach firearm safety in elementary school. The Eddie Eagle program that was sponsored and funded by the NRA provided this education. One of the biggest influxes, though, of criminal activity was when states closed down mental health institutions, kicked everybody out, closed and locked the door behind them. No help, no guidance. They became homeless. Typically, homelessness leads to criminal activity because they still need food, they want clothes, everything else. There is no path to success for these people who may have not had any path of success in regular civilization without state aid.
Mm-hmm. So let me say that if you're going to go that route, so let's say that we're not banning guns. I mean, we're all firearm owners here. Nobody wants guns banned, but what if they made it harder to get guns? What if it made you had to go through mental health evaluations? You had to get checked out.
That
because
goes back to
states
my
do
thing
that.
of yes, you're supposed to do a mental health check, yes, in certain areas.
But
that then goes to what if people who may have mental issues but don't directly correlate to violent incidences that are now barred from a constitutional right because somebody else interpreted that it was dangerous.
Okay,
So-
so well, there's different classifications of mental health. You could have a depressive state. You can either be
It's
very
such a spectrum. Like,
But
how
you
do
can be depressed and not
connotate-
suicidal or homicidal.
yeah.
Everyone experiences depression, anxiety, all sorts of these things because it's a normal human
Mhm.
physiological reaction. Nothing changes. The problem is then, okay, if there's a mental health examination, who determines this? Is it going to be conservative leaning? Is it going to be liberal leaning? That's what I got my degree in, psychology, right? Psychology is a very liberally oriented study. It always has been. Psychology, diagnostics of mental illness goes very much with how society determines the pressure on psychologists to determine these things, right? Like ADHD used to be one thing, and now you have a spectrum. Autism used to be one thing, now you have a spectrum. So you may not have been autistic when you were 5, but now you fall somewhere within being super autistic and you're right on the edge, but you fall in that spectrum. So trying to determine mental health as an evaluation to whether or not you own firearms is completely off the wall. And there's no actual determination that will judge someone's ability to carry out their constitutional right.
Okay, so if you're schizophrenic and you have violent tendencies, should you own a firearm?
Well, that's a very specific classification.
I'm sure there are
No, and
plenty of
those
people
rules
out
are
there.
already in place.
Yeah, I mean,
But how
I mean-
much so? How much so are they in place? Because this guy was a schizophrenic, and he
yeah,
was violent in the past.
Yeah, and he also committed a felony that by our corrupt prosecutor at the time, that was a prosecutor for Ingham County, allowed him to plea down to a misdemeanor. That should have never occurred. She should also be liable, and that judge who authorized that plea deal.
So what is the solution here, guys?
There isn't.
There has to be, because otherwise kids are just going to keep dying.
Then
I
let
mean, you
gun-free
have
zones go away.
much higher paid people with much more academia reviewing.
No, but the point of this is for us to come to a conclusion, right? So we have to have at a certain point figure out what we think. For me, it's a combination of both. If tomorrow they said that, okay, you're gonna have to have mental health evaluations, we're gonna check your background, talk to people around you, and see if you're a valid and you're a stable human being. We're gonna check your work record. We're gonna check that, and then we're gonna give you this license that says here you are cleared to purchase a gun. I'd have no problem with it.
Okay, so what
Who's
happens
paying
10
that?
years 10 years
Hmm?
from now when you lose your
Well,
job and your
We're
life
spending
life
hundreds of
leaves?
millions to Ukraine, so why don't we spend that doing that? I'm not arguing
Fair.
with Tim about that. We spend a lot of money we shouldn't.
Okay, but what happens 10 years from now when your wife leaves you and you lose your job and all these other things happen and your life falls apart around you? Now all of a sudden you're manic depressive and
Well,
things fall apart and now you're a bad person. Are you going to do annual checks? Are you going to do
No, but you have to get your CPL done every 4 or 5 years.
you go in and file another paperwork?
Yeah, so do the same
So
thing.
you want to do the whole thing all over again every 5 years?
That's what they do in a lot of countries that allow for firearms. They do periodic check-ins on you. See, are you doing okay?
But the difference between other countries and our country is that that's not a constitutional right for them. Firearms at the base core of the Constitution is to protect against a tyrannical government. It's not about hunting. It's not about self-defense. It's allowing the citizens to maintain that the federal government stays in check.
It's a pursuit of life, liberty. The Constitution protects your rights from being infringed upon. Now,
Yes.
at a certain point, your right to own a gun, isn't that infringing upon some of the restrictions that are needed to protect other people from getting gunned down?
No, because I'm not using it to harm anyone. A criminal is violating the constitutional rights
But
of
the
others'
Constitution
right
is
to
used by
life.
everybody within the country. It covers everyone. So
Yeah.
it's not just the Constitution wasn't created to protect your rights. It was created to protect everyone's rights. Now, if your right to own a firearm and having some of these loose rules in terms of firearm transfer, like Mike said, in terms of private dealers being able to sell long guns to each other without needing paperwork, is infringing upon other people, or that is leading to people purchasing firearms and using them in violence. And I'm not saying that's the case, because most of the time these violent offenders are buying them legally from gun shops.
And a majority of them
doing-
are using handguns. They're not using the
Mhm.
long guns, which are not as restricted.
And it's the same thing. The whole idea of, it's not, for me, it's not about long AR-15s versus sniper rifles versus pistols versus shotguns. For me, I'd run from all of them if I was getting shot at them. Doesn't really matter. Honestly, a shotgun terrifies me more than any rifle does.
Yeah,
Like, it does. It's just the case.
It should.
Yeah.
You got a dude just running a pump.
Yeah. If I hear that in the middle of the night, I know something is wrong.
So let me tell you a quick story before you finish your thought, Raj. So there was a guy, and he was talking about handguns, and he was like, you got to use a 45. You got to have the biggest, baddest bullet that you can use in a handgun, right? If you're going to stop a threat. And the guy that was shooting next to him was like, okay. He said he pulled out his 45 pistol. It was a 1911, for those that know what that is. He goes, so would you go down range while I shoot this? Guy's like, no, absolutely not. Guy put it away, reached into his bag, pulled out a 22 long rifle pistol. He said, would you go down range when I shot that? He said, no. He said, so it doesn't matter then.
Honestly, yeah. So the whole idea of what type of gun to ban, for me, it's not banning guns. It's not about you saying these are not good for U.S. citizens to have, these are good for U.S. citizens to have, because that gets real sketchy at that point on what they want us to have. My issue is access to firearms is a fundamental right, but to protect those around you and to be a part of a society that cares about others, you also have to be willing to sacrifice some conveniences to make sure that bad people don't get access to them. Even if it means you have to jump through more hoops, you as a member of society are saying, okay, I'm willing to sacrifice a little bit of this to make sure that we're all going to follow this process.
I think, and hold on, Tim, before you say no. I think Tim would be more open to it, or people like Tim. How about that? Because I'm not going to speak for Tim, but I'll say people that have the same agenda and line of thought as him is if people would meet those that you would see conservative on the issue in the middle, right? So, admit that the right to bear arms is a constitutional right, and that it doesn't mean, because some people would like to say that means, well, they were talking about muskets and cannons back then. No, we all agree in pretty much every other amendment in our Bill of Rights, and the verbiage of the Constitution was made intentionally vague by our founding fathers because they had the foresight to know that in 100, 200, 300 years, things were going to change.
Also, tyrannical governments nowadays aren't loading muskets; they're loading fully automatic weapons. So that's
and on that, when it comes to
mutant warrior.
purchasing of muskets, you don't need any paperwork or anything. I bought one on the internet, and it was shipped to my door.
Even for a black powder pistol.
Tool.
Yep. But we won't get into that. I don't want to confuse people. So first they need to admit that it is a right, and that it wasn't just written for muskets. That the founding, because we've put that on the Fourth Amendment, we've put it on the Eighth Amendment, right? That the Supreme Court has consistently shown that the forefathers had the foresight to think that things were going to change. So we accept however we interpret it now because of that. So the Second Amendment has no difference, right? That's the first thing I'd like to see. The second thing I'd like to hear is that they acknowledge that it would practically be impossible to ban firearms in the United States. It would be. Even if you did, even if tomorrow Biden signed an executive order that said you have to turn in every firearm, the good citizens would do it, and that's fine. The bad people would not, and the crazies wouldn't either. And so now you would have to find a force that would execute the president's will to go to those people's homes and take their firearms from them. First off, no sheriff or police agency is going to do that because they're just going to get shot anytime they walk up to a door. Then you say, well, we'll do the military. The military swears an oath to the
Oh, God, no.
Constitution. They don't swear an oath to the president. So if whoever in the military believes that the Second Amendment is a constitutional right, they do not have to execute that order.
And they would have to have congressional
Approval.
authority to enter the United States on an actual operation.
Yeah. So that's a
Then They
lot.
would fall to the National Guard, and the National Guard is run by the states, still not by the president.
Eesh. So again, that is not a valid option. So we come to what you're talking about, Raj, right? Adding more hoops. Now, I like some of the ideas that I've heard, and I don't like some of the ideas that I've heard. And I personally would be willing to sit down and have a conversation if somebody met me in the middle and acknowledge the first two things, right? If you can acknowledge to me that those first two things are clear and true and there really is no way around it, now we can sit down and we can actually talk about, okay, what can we do to make things better? And it's not ban all guns. It's not get rid of certain firearms, because you're going to get rid of this certain, even if they banned ARs, they're going to come up with something new in 5 years. You know what I mean? That's going to be similar.
I mean, run a pumped shotgun just as fast as you can.
Yeah, California's been trying for a long time to get rid of ARs, and they've made it really hard, but people still own them there, you know?
Or find loopholes around the different things. I remember seeing
the super wacky
buttons.
California compliant ones.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, at the end of the day, someone will find a way. So, you know, you look at some of the states that do have the stricter gun laws, right? A lot of the East Coast states, California, and, you know, I forget exactly what the like New Jersey, for example, right? Do you remember exactly, Nick, how New Jersey goes?
Well, they have to first, even to get a long gun, they have to get a file for a purchase permit that they go through a rigorous check. I know my father-in-law received handguns as inheritance, yes, and he had to go through an extremely rigorous background and had to actually hand over the handguns prior. And then he was in the middle of moving to Michigan at the time, and they were going to refuse returning the property to him due to the fact that it was still in background. So he got first a long gun purchase permit, then he got a pistol purchase permit, and then had it legally transferred. And
so you have to fill out paperwork to get a permit that you can then go and fill out more paperwork to get the gun, basically.
Correct. And it was this extremely laborious thing. And mind you, my father-in-law at the time worked for an airline and had clearances to be, you know, go through TSA, all these other things, travel internationally, everything else. And he still had to go through all of these hoops just to get these firearms, which he had already been in possession of many years before.
So those are hoops, right? And
see, that's the issue. I don't like bureaucratic hoops.
Okay.
Oh, I agree with that.
I want mental health hoops.
Okay.
I don't want I don't want meaningless paperwork. First off, I want to get rid of I want to get all the gun laws that we have right now, scrap them, because they haven't done anything. I want to start and review all the gun laws, see the stuff that's fundamental, stuff that we can keep, and that's where both sides have to come together. Both sides have to come together and look at these laws and say, what is it about these laws that are actually doing anything? Okay, so obviously this is not just whether or not the gun can have 30 rounds or 10 rounds. That doesn't make a difference, because guy can go to another state, buy a 30 round, drive back, and use that 30 round in a crime. That's not making a difference. Whether or not your gun is 16 inches or 13 inches is not making a difference. Whether or not it's suppressed is not making a difference. Whether or not it has a brace is not making a difference. These ATF rules and regulations, along with the laws that we have, are not doing anything.
Abolish the ATF.
Well, the ATF is useless as it is. Other than shooting dogs, they don't really do anything else. But
yes, yes.
Even I have to admit that they've been useless. Like, they should just stick to, it should just be no firearms, just alcohol and tobacco. That's their job. That's their only thing.
Store.
They also are pretty good at arson.
Apparently, I'm not going to comment on that because that might's going to see a shitstorm that we start.
But the A and T aren't fun without the F.
And the
they are definitely down to A and T, but no F. Okay, so those rules and regulations we have are doing nothing. I just want us to meet in the middle and go through these laws and say what is going to be the most effective. Me personally, I think that having mental health loopholes or checks is going to do a lot more, and having more rigorous mental health checks is going to do a lot more. Background checks is going to do a lot more than some of these silly gun laws that haven't done anything.
Now,
Okay.
of the ones that are currently upstanding, what ones would you continue? Would you continue things like the NFA? Would you continue things like pistol purchase background checks? Would you
No.
add to AR or semi-automatic weapon purchase?
I would say that having automatic weapons should be banned. Me personally, I believe automatic weapons should be banned. You can disagree on that however you feel like it, but if these psychopaths had access to automatic weapons, there'd be a lot more casualties.
I mean, but then you go from, there's a difference of opinion and things of, we talk about these school mass shootings. What we don't talk about is like gang shootings, drive-bys that are mass shootings. There's multiple people involved that are shot and killed. Why does that constitute a mass shooting? And these are happening with Glock switches.
That's a semantic. So here's the thing. That's also one of the things I want to change is what constitutes a mass shooting.
Well, that's what I'm saying is I have a problem with these shootings that are happening that aren't being called mass shootings, but more people are dying every day in the street of Chicago, Detroit, all these areas, and they're using Glock switches, which are these 3D printed or somehow manufactured attachments to handguns.
And these dudes are showing it off on TikTok. They're showing it off on TikTok and Facebook. They're just showing it. Just these idiots. Go after these people.
I have friends in the law enforcement community that deal with people in that nature, and they'll openly talk about, I have this on this gun. I have, I've got a bag of switches at home.
Yeah. So for me, that's the thing. NFA, in terms of automatic weapons, should not be allowed. For me, like I said, I'm only speaking for myself. Automatic weapons should be banned. NFA in rules of how long your barrel length is and how long, whether or not you can have a suppressor or a stock or any of those rules, they're useless. Throw them out. They don't do anything.
Now, do you agree with some of the, the aging out of guns and, historical replicas or...
Dude, if somebody wants to go on a mass shooting with a Mosin Nagant...
No, I'm talking about the fully automatic ones. The NFA regulates that, if they're made before a certain year...
Doesn't matter. Automatic... I don't care if it's a Lewis gun from the 1800s. You're not allowed to have it unless you can prove that you can do it with this...
So you are actually allowed to have it because a Gatling gun is not a machine gun.
Because it's a crank?
No.
Yeah, because it actuates every shot for every activation of that crank.
Also, you have to carry it around in the back of your van to be useful.
Don't tempt me, Raj.
Can you imagine an old-timey carriage comes out and this Gatling gun going up?
Drop the tailgate.
Yeah. Just no.
Get the horse up to speed there, Billy.
Yeah, so even that stuff, like I don't believe that we need to have that openly available to everybody that goes out there. You should be either an FFL to own it. You should have some type of very rigorous background check. Same thing with explosives.
So not banning entirely, but requiring additional licenses.
Exactly how we have it now for a lot of these machine guns.
So you have to license.
Yeah, you need a level 3 license where they literally comb through you every part of your life to find out whether or not you can actually own this, okay? Because that's stuff that's highly trackable. FFLs,
there are actually types of FFLs that will allow you to deal in and purchase those.
Correct. But you have to make a certain number of purchases and sales within
I'm talking about somebody walking into a gun store should not be able to just go ahead and buy that unless you're already an FFL.
They can't.
Or you work towards getting your FFL and having the ability to go purchase that having that beforehand.
So my issue is they already can't. We've essentially outlawed machine guns as it is.
Well, I mean, you see people on
so maintain
YouTube
that jurisdiction.
Yes.
Of authority.
Yes, in terms of these small, tiny little things that make no difference, like barrel lengths, pistol grips, making whether or not it's a pistol or rifle or whatnot based on the length of it, it does not affect whether or not it's going to be used as a weapon to do mass
Agree.
shootings. It doesn't make a difference for me.
I'd like
So-
to touch on the whole mass shooting categorization thing too,
Mhm.
because I'll tell you exactly what a mass shooting is.
It's anything more than 2 people, isn't it?
Well, no. So listen, this is what a mass shooting is. Wink, wink. Right? It has to occur in a gun-free zone. It has to occur or around a zone that should be gun-free. It has to occur. It has to promote the gun cancel culture with its effect with the community or the country.
Oh, you're talking about the media's
Yeah.
reason.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
There has to be at least 2 victims that did not know the shooter. Okay. And generally, the shooter has to either have a criminal background or a undiagnosed mental instability that they discover after the fact, or they believe to have. Those are the 4 criteria for something to be a mass shooting in the media's eyes. Now, what it should be, I think, is 3 or more people that pass away. Okay, not just injuries. It doesn't matter what firearm they use. It doesn't matter who the person is, and it doesn't matter where it happens. The problem is, like you, Wix, and all them were saying, is there's a lot of shootings in,
The hood.
yeah, rougher areas that 3 people probably do die consistently, like almost daily, and that's not a mass shooting. That's just violence in the city, right? So
In Lansing, Michigan, we had an area which suffered more than 30 murders in the space of like 6 months.
Let's turn that and turn it into something where mass shootings are different than domestic terrorism attacks. Let's call it what it is then. It's a domestic terrorist attack.
is
Domestic
Okay.
terrorist attacks in my mind have to have an agenda.
yeah.
This guy had an agenda. It was to take down Lansing
Well,
at MSU. He wanted to hurt Lansing. That was his plan. In his own notes and his own thoughts, he wanted to do something against Lansing. That was his agenda. If your agenda is just to hurt people, it's still an agenda.
I would have to say it would have to promote something either religious, racial, or
a group.
What is it?
Group.
Why though?
Yeah, either a group or an outside or an entity.
Why though?
So-
It's terrorism. You are trying to provide terror in a society. That's
So-
terrorism.
Driving down the
terror-
road shooting your Uzi is terror in a community, which
You terrorize the community, so that's a terroristic attack.
But if you look at the actual
So every
Webster
drive-by is a
dictionary
terrorist
diction of terrorism,
Mhm.
it is the promotion of a
Generally, drive-bys are meant
group
with an intended
with
target, though.
violence.
Either an intended gang member and people that get caught in the crossfires because these people use fully automatic Glocks that they have no idea how to control.
yeah.
So that's
Well,
not a
yeah,
terrorist
since we
attack.
have it.
An attack would be if somebody went like the guy in Kalamazoo, went on a spree, attacking at random, didn't care about race, ethnicity, sex. It did not matter. He just shot whenever he felt like it. That was a terroristic attack on Kalamazoo.
But I mean, look at the.
I
back
don't
and look
agree
at the
with that.
Well, here's the
Dictionary
thing: predominantly
definition of
terrorism. When we
terrorism.
look, yeah, but when we look at terrorism, for the most part, the word terrorism didn't come into effect until Al Qaeda, until these brown communities that did these mass, and these are people terrorizing their own community.
No, because you had domestic terrorism in the sense of the
Unabomber.
Yeah. So, but when we talk about people that set off an IED in their own country, we call it a terrorist attack. We don't call it a domestic terrorist attack in Iraq, right? It's just a terrorist attack. So why is it all these
but
attacks
those
in our
were-
own?
I
I'm
guess
gonna-
at that
I'm gonna
time those
chime
were
in.
targeted towards U.S. military assets.
No, they blow up.
Oh no, I totally agree. They blow
Markets.
each other up. Yes,
They blow up markets. It doesn't matter. It's still in their own country. These are people from their country blowing up things in their own country, hurting their own countrymen, and we call it a terrorist attack.
Go ahead.
These are American citizens attacking other American citizens.
So I'm going to chime in because I've sat by for a little while now. So to kind of tag on what we're talking about here, so from Britannica, the definition of a mass shooting. So a mass shooting called an active shooter incident as defined by the US FBI is an event in which one or more individuals are actively engaged in killing or attempting to kill people in a populated area. Implicit in the definition, obviously, is the use of a firearm. The FBI has not set a minimum number of casualties to qualify an event as a mass shooting, but U.S. statute, the Investigative Assistance for Violent Crimes Act of 2012, defines a mass killing as 3 or more killings in a single incident. So that is kind of where the FBI chimes in on that one, according to Britannica. Now, according to the FBI's website as well, and I maximize that, whoops. Domestic terrorism is defined as violent criminal acts committed by individuals and or groups to further ideological goals stemming from domestic influences, such as those of a political, religious, social, racial, or environmental nature. So now on what Raj is saying, if you have an incident that occurs in another country, like against its own citizens, a terroristic attack, to them it's domestic terrorism. The reason we call it a terrorist attack is because it's not domestic to us. That's the only reason we refer to it as such. Or like Nick pointed out, if it's during a wartime incident where it's usually targeting some kind of effect on a foreign asset, it wouldn't be a domestic terrorist attack because it's not targeting their own people. But if it does target their own people, to them it's domestic terrorism. To us, it's just terrorism because we don't live there. We only refer to domestic terrorism as what's domestically related to us. Now, in terms of like the gang violence, the inner city violence, that's where, maybe we need to refer to it differently, because by all intents and purposes, any kind of shooting that involves 3 or more victims, that is a mass shooting. And these happen all the time in large cities across America, and yet they are not classified as such. That would be skyrocketing. And honestly, those statistics would far outweigh the ones that do get reported on that we consider as mass shootings. Obviously, I'm not advocating for any of it. I mean, it shouldn't happen regardless. Where it happens, when it happens, doesn't make it okay. So just to be clear on that, not every shooting is going to be a terrorist attack in the sense that, at least the way the FBI defines domestic terrorism. I mean, terrorism at its root is just, doing some kind of violent act to instill terror into a large group of people, but they obviously use it at a federal level to define it, guided by some sort of ideology. It doesn't have to be, this huge, like, overarching ideology of this organization with thousands of people. I mean, it could be one guy with some, whatever his motivation is, if it's political, environmental, religious, racial, that could be considered a domestic terrorist attack, and as well it should be.
I mean, you have the guy that was the killdozer that drove through buildings. That was domestic terrorism. He didn't injure anyone that I know of.
Right.
Yeah, that's my point. He terrorized an entire community, right?
But it was ideological. It had a basis of going outside other than just to hurt people. It was a targeted attack.
Yeah, this was a targeted attack against he went to a place that Lansing is known for. It's university, and attacked it directly. It's the same reason the Unabomber picked his target. It's the same reason that any of these places, the guy that went into a movie theater dressed as the Joker and started shooting people.
And the big thing comes down to, you would have to get the federal government to change its definition.
We're getting into the semantics of it, so now in terms of definition, but really the conversation stems from accurate reporting of this information, which will lead to then us having accurate data to compile to then know how to actually handle the statistics of what we're looking at. because we're getting a lot of issues that are muddled alongside it. If they're adding gang violence, I mean, I heard reports of some of them they were adding self-inflicted gunshots as adding gun violence. That's a suicide. That's not a gun violence. If you shoot yourself in the head with a gun, that should not be held under gun violence. That should be held under a separate category altogether because you're just skewing the data.
Correct.
You
The
can't do that.
the problem comes down to it is where gun control activists actually do include those statistics in an attempt to bolster the numbers, stating that there is far more gun violence than what there actually is. And that's the thing. I mean, looking at it, you know, we obviously want to look at it from a statistical, like, evidence-based standpoint. It is, I'm not saying that this hasn't increased in frequency, but obviously when all you hear is these stories being reported upon, it also does make it seem like this is occurring far more frequently in our minds. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's that perception that it's happening like every day, whereas it's not. It is happening at an increased rate. But when
Here's the difference, though. I mean, murders and shootings are happening all over the place, and they've happened for a long time. I mean, we can go back to Al Capone's days, and there was mass shootings and killings. Valentine's Day Massacre.
Mhm.
But the target is changing. What really hits us is when schools get attacked, when churches get attacked, when mosques, synagogues, when Bible study gets attacked.
Soft target.
Those targets that we have is not something that we're used to. But unfortunately, we're getting used to it now. Schools are now targets for these people.
Well, you go back to Al Capone's time, and that was actually a time when America was flooded with firearms, and not just any firearms. Post World War II,
machine guns,
fully automatic machine guns, everything else, and everyone came back trained to use them, and they were everywhere. So now you have trained armed men fighting trained armed men in the streets, targeting each other.
Mm-hmm.
And they were
with a very inaccurate weapon.
But for the most part, were not engaging non-involved persons.
Mm-hmm.
But now you have people that realize that I don't know if it's an inferiority complex or what, but have to gain power. I'm preying on these weaker individuals and these unarmed individuals because they know that. Because now you're not post World War II. You're not post Vietnam where you had trained men everywhere. Granted, we are post, GWAT 9/11. I mean, that's still kind of a thing, but we're a much more neutered culture in the sense of that, where back in the day, Granddad had the gun, the M1 Grand over the fireplace or in the Foot Locker next to the couch, and now you have these people that are highly trained that are told what you have is no longer valuable to us.
Mm-hmm.
Rejoin society and put that all behind you, which is now leading to mental health issues amongst the crowds.
If I can chime in real quick.
Tim.
So one of my biggest things is I will not give up any form of liberty for more safety.
Correct. You should never have anyone else tell you that you're safe. Ensure safety.
So Ben Franklin once said, those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. So just kind of touching on that a little bit as far as like, what would you do to allow these areas to become safer? Nothing. I remember when I was a kid and my uncle flew in from Alaska right into the airport. Ran up the escalator right to the window to watch his plane roll right up to the gate, give him a hug when he got off of the gate. And now if you go beyond their kind of stupid little security thing, since the last TSA audit found that they didn't find a majority of the items that they should have.
I want to say the last time I flew, I accidentally flew with a knife and it got one way, but it didn't get the other way.
Yeah. So my problem is that how much liberty do we give up for the false illusion of safety? So that's a big thing. Another thing like Chicago, right? So just recently, there's an off-duty female police officer who shot and killed an attempted mugger after she warned him. She luckily being an off-duty police officer, was allowed to carry a concealed firearm on her person in the city of Chicago. For just a normal law-abiding citizen, the number of hoops that you'd have to try and jump through just to try and be a law-abiding citizen is outrageous. That's why one of the biggest reasons why crime is so high. There's a documentary, can't remember the name of it. There's an individual who was doing this documentary, went to prisons, asked them, if you had the thought that your potential victim was armed, would you still have committed the crime? The group of prisoners was a resounding no, because they didn't want to take the risk. Second, Al Capone's time, so you're talking like early 1920s to, let's say like 1950, right? Mobsters, everything, everybody kind of come back from World War II. You could bring your service weapon home for the most part. You could bring weapons that you captured home. I don't think mental illness is definitely an issue that plays into violent crime, including mass shootings. But I think another large aspect of this that we're all kind of glancing over is morality. The individual morals have changed of the nation. Every religion has a basic moral principle. That's one great thing that religions did bring to the world. Granted, there are those extremists in every religion that have committed horrible atrocities, but they all have very basic fundamental principles, right? Like, and we have lost that, right? We've lost the morality of the country. People are grabbing their crotch and opening their butt during the Super Bowl, doing things that our grandparents would have been like, that's unnecessary. It's inappropriate. Our children shouldn't be witnessing these things. Our children should be safe at schools. When you have individuals who, one, either have no moral light or guidance, or a combination of no morality or mental illness, they don't care. They don't. There is not that little voice inside of them that says, this is a bad idea. We should treat each other with respect, dignity, love your neighbor as yourself. Me being a Christian, that's a core fundamental. So I have those basic principles that guide me in my day-to-day life, right? I carry a firearm. I haven't committed any crimes with it. I don't plan on it. My gun itself can't just get up and walk out the door. The firearms are not the problem. It's the individual that commits these heinous acts. And I think that's a big thing. You see it everywhere, right? Desensitization within American, not even specifically American, but in global culture, right? You go into Mexico and the cartels are actively hanging people from highways. If you do this, this is what you get. And the government's just like, yep, because we're also fighting the cartel. We're at a war with the cartel. You go into any country in the world, and there's always going to be these issues for people who don't have some type of moral principle about them. And unfortunately, that's not a thing that any law can change. It's society who has to make these impacts at home, with family structure, in the community, with having safe communities, neighbors who watch out for neighbors. When I was a kid and stay with my grandparents, they would give me some money to go down to the little corner store. I could walk down the sidewalk without a care in the world. Why? Because the community watched out for each other, because they had that moral obligation to make sure the community was safe so the children can be safe.
Well, Pandora's box is open. Like, this is not going away, because this is a precedent has been set for people that are in this mental state where they've seen these people glorified. First of all, the idea of glorifying these people on news, it sickens me. I don't want to see their face. I don't want to know who they are. I don't care that they suffered a mental illness. If they're dead, great. If you have them, put them in a dark hole somewhere. I don't
And
care.
that is
And-
honestly, I think that is a big issue that we face is a lot of times we find so-called copycats or people that, you know, may be influenced by the fact that they see this stuff glorified on television. You know, that there is actually, I don't have the statistics in front of me, but I know there have been people looking into the impact of what showing these suspects and the things that they've done has actually done to impact that type of event.
It's a glorification, honestly, what it is.
Yeah.
For most people, they're sickened by it, but for the people that are in the same mind state, they look at this guy as a hero.
Oh yeah,
And
they're
they look
like,
at this guy as like, oh, he made a difference. He's going to be known from now on. When in reality, nobody's going to remember this guy's name 20 years
No.
from now.
and the thing is, to them, it's a catalyst.
No. And going back to what Tim said, yes, guns don't kill people. People kill people. It's a true statement. People have to pull that trigger.
Well,
But it's
that's
also a combination of that gun and that person that's
Or that
causing-
U-Haul truck, or that knife, or that bow.
That's
that
fine.
bomb.
That knife the guy could have gone around with a knife, but people are gonna more likely run from that guy with a with a gun versus a knife. Knives are inherently, I understand they're dangerous, but if a guy comes in with an AR-15 and a guy comes in with a knife, I have a chance with the guy with a knife.
The guy killed 4 college students with a knife in Idaho.
Sure, he could have killed more people with a gun. Inherently, he can kill more. The killing capacity of a gun is more than a knife. I think we can
Guns
agree.
run out of bullets.
You can bring more mags. Nobody ever comes into a mass shooting with one magazine. It's never happened. They come in with multiple, if not multiple guns. So I understand the idea that you don't have to reload a knife, but you can have 30 bullets in a magazine, and you can have 6 magazines strapped to you.
Just
I
pull out
mean-
your sharpener. Hold on, guys.
Yeah. Just gotta sharpen the
The-
knife
the
in the middle
honing
of
rod.
a murder. Yeah. No,
But-
we have to understand it's not mutually exclusive. It's not only mental health, but it's the access of guns to people that have mental health issues that want to do harm. And I understand this is not a simple issue, that it's not going to be black and white. Oh, this guy's going to commit a murder. This guy's not. What is that movie? It's not Equilibrium. Is that
No,
what it
it's
is?
Minority Report.
Minority Report, where they can just tell when
Pre-crime.
somebody's going to commit a murder. But we also cannot. That's the issue that I have with politics nowadays. It's basically one side is guns don't kill people, people kill people. The other side is guns kill people. It's a combination of both, and we have to understand that. And nobody is
Also-
willing.
Correct.
So
but
as far
also
as
the-
like, okay, you can go ahead.
well, what we talk about less, which I think is good and bad in media, is the number of shootings that are stopped by a law-abiding citizen with a gun because nobody on one side of the aisle versus the other wants to talk about it, so it gets squashed immediately or never comes up in the first place.
The
As
estimates
you-
are 2.5 million lawful uses of firearms to stop crime in the
Yeah,
United
so
States.
it ranges usually anywhere starting at 100 to 500,000 all the way up to 3 million is the estimated based on census data and criminologist info.
Jesus.
Yeah, but
I can say from experience that I just had a family member recently, as of
Yeah.
was it yesterday, get mugged at a place of work. He showed up to work in the morning. A gentleman met him outside of the building, attempted to get money off of him. He refused. He became aggressive with him, and rather than a potential moment of violence, he gave up his car keys and let the guy steal the vehicle. Granted, had he had a firearm in that situation, that could have been a much different outcome. Not to saying that shooting somebody over a car is the right thing every time, but it could have maybe de-escalated or deterred that event. Or more people, if that guy has met people before in an alley and came up with a gun instead of what he wanted, it might be a different story.
Well, and I think kind of to go off of that, those statistics, when you look at the amount of gun violence in the country, whether it's homicides with a firearm, whether it's mass shootings, take all those statistics into account. When you look at the stats of on the low end, 100,000 to an estimated potential 3 million times a year, with that kind of data that, guns are used to save lives or in a self-defense scenario. I mean, to me, that's one of the biggest statistics for the good outweighing the bad. In the sense too that So I'm kind of reading, and I'll tell you exactly where it's coming from. All these stats, they are linked sources from one of the Change My Mind segments of Steven Crowder on Common Sense Gun Control. But he lists his sources at the bottom, so that's kind of just where I went to look at some of these. 98% of mass shootings occur in gun-free zones. The U.S. is obviously number one in the world for gun ownership by far per capita, but we only ranked 28th in the firearm deaths in the world. And of those, 2/3 were listed as suicides, and in 2017, out of the 38,000 total gun deaths, 23,000 were suicide and only 14,000 were murders. Most of our gun statistics aren't separated by murder and suicide.
More people die each year from tripping and falling.
Well, actually, the big thing too is, between 1999 and 2019, violent crime was actually steadily decreasing in the United States. And in 2020, the crime spike wasn't due to mass shootings. It was due to riots. I mean, we're all living through it. We understand what happened. The FBI preliminary data estimates that homicides increased 25% in 2020, breaking 20K for the first time since 1995. And after Bill de Blasio defunded NYPD, shootings in New York City increased to 97%. So, and that's kind of me tagging along with what Tim was saying, is I don't think the gun problem is the issue or the gun control problem is the issue. We have a people problem. Like, we have a crime problem, the criminal element. We have an underfunded police issue. Like, the thing that is going to stop criminal activity the most is increasing the policing. I'm not talking about a police state where it's like, run through the checkpoint, show me your papers. But I'm just talking about like adequately staffed, funded policing that is out there trying to get the bad people off the streets that shouldn't be there. And I think Tim's entirely right. I mean, I think we're living in a morally bankrupt society. More and more things are, steering towards narcissism and nepotism, and not in the looking out for each other in the community. And I mean, Raj is right too. We've kind of opened Pandora's box there. That's just kind of the way that things have gone.
I think social media has been a big factor.
Social media is a huge factor, and I think that goes along with the glorification of things too.
Social media would be the first thing I ban in my firearm bill.
Oh,
that's honestly where it would go.
Honestly, Raj, I don't even need a firearm bill for that. Just get rid of it all. Like, I literally, me personally, I've deleted TikTok. There were many nights that I would be sitting there scrolling through for hours, just watching the time go away, not realizing it. And then a few month period goes by where I wasn't on social media, wasn't like stressed out by it, didn't care about it, and realized, and actually had a like moment where I realized how much of my life it was consuming without giving any tangible benefit back. And I'm like, this is toxic. And I don't use that word very often. I use it very sparingly because I think it's overused in society. But social media is absolute. It can be used for certain beneficial things. I'm not saying all of it is evil, but by and large, social media is nothing but toxicity being shoved in the face of everybody.
It's affecting children. That's the problem.
So much.
It's affecting the children and their self-esteem and their self-worth. Everything is based on likes. Everything is based on how they look compared to the Becky in the class next door. None of that matters. But for them, in their little social climate, in what they're developing, that affects everything. Body dysmorphia is really big now. We have an issue with people that are basically losing any form of self-esteem because they're constantly comparing themselves to everything else around them.
Their self-worth is tied to a number at the bottom of a video.
But
pretty much.
I also attribute that to the lack of parenting or core family structure.
Oh, no doubt.
Why are parents giving their young children social medias who can't really comprehend what even tomorrow is?
If the parents didn't set it up, they'll do it at a school computer or they'll do it somewhere else. That's not going to stop them. These social media companies attempt to age restrict this stuff is laughable.
Well, and that's limiting access to that stuff, right? Like schools should have lockdowns. Yeah.
You can get a Facebook at like what? At what age?
13.
It's like 13. Yeah.
13.
Yeah.
I
So
probably wouldn't let my kids have a phone at 13, let alone
Yeah.
internet access.
I didn't have one till high school, and that was like I
Yeah.
think junior
I
year
didn't
of high
have a
school.
watch until I was like 18.
That's
I mean,
because you ate
Fair.
life cereal with water.
Yeah,
I mean, that's true. I'll give
Yeah,
it
so
that.
that's a different story.
But no, to kind of come back to the gun issue here too. I mean, I think also any ideas that are proposed, a lot of it from your average citizen, it's proposed from a good place. It's not them wanting to screw over other people. It's them genuinely just being frustrated and concerned with what's going on in the world. And that's why I try not to get upset with anybody who, you know, has disagreeing opinions. I try not to do that anyway, because we've lost the civil debate in this country a long time ago. That's the whole point of this podcast. But don't get me wrong, I think there are people out there in higher realms that do have a political leaning and a motivation for keeping or banning guns, whether it be financial gain, whether it be, you know, a more sinister approach from a government standpoint. I'm sure there are people with those kinds of motives. The kind of what we talked about earlier, kind of skipping back to the mental health issue, I think personally, after thinking about it and hearing what everybody was saying, man, if you go down that road, it's got to be a super scope limited of who would have their rights removed because of that. Because I mean, you get DSM definitions changed by the American Psychiatric Association. Things that are classified as such aren't anymore. They change definitions. There is just such a potential for a slippery slope to just lead into large scale bannings per mental health.
No, and that's why I said Pandora's box, because the box is open. We're never going to have a perfect solution. It's just not
No,
possible.
it's
Not
not.
with the society that we have, not with the access to firearms that have already been set as precedent. Like we're not going back from this, but it's literally going to be how much can we negate is all we can do.
I think honestly, Tim's kind of around the right side where it's a society and a culture issue now. I don't think there's a lot of mechanical standpoints we can put into it. I mean, like Gooch talked about at the beginning of this, we have put in a lot of steps and safeguards to try and curtail people not having access to firearms that shouldn't. There's always going to be an issue somewhere where imperfect people creating an imperfect system, there's going to be a crack somewhere that someone's going to find and just stick their head right through it.
So as a society, then, so the people that saw this guy, his behavior, his father who lived with him, knew about his behavior, knew about what he was like, knew about the firearm. He didn't report it. Nobody came to check on him. That's a failure of society, correct?
Well, my other thing is too that while
if he had reported him, say that we had a legislation in place that if he was reported and they looked at it and they found that he needed psychiatric help and they removed his gun from him, and is that a system that could work?
So we actually do kind of have that already where, like you said, in one of the questions you answer on that federal form, if you have been adjudicated mentally defective by a court or you have been involuntarily committed to a psychiatric facility, you are not allowed to purchase a firearm. There's also stipulations with that on concealed carry permits.
Not to purchase a firearm, but will they take his existing firearms?
Yes.
They will.
Yes.
If they're usually what happens is there's a court order to do that.
Mm-hmm.
If that person is adjudicated mentally defective or they are not incarcerated, they are institutionalized into a mental health psychiatric facility. A judge will issue a removal order and a seizure of those items. And then depending on what the outcome is, sometimes people are put into those facilities based on information that wasn't true. There is essentially a review process that goes into that to see, is this person legally allowed to have these firearms now? Are they not? What are the steps here?
So it's a failure of the system to do what it was supposed to do.
It was a failure of the public to not.
So that's where I'm like trying to figure out where does the blame stop, right? Does it stop when the person doesn't report something?
No, I don't think we can really place the blame anywhere except for the person who did the act, in the sense that there may be things that are concerning, but there has to be a legal standard of what is actionable. If you're like, this person's kind of out there, I don't like some of the things they say, or I don't like how this person, talks about this group of people. I feel like he could have some biases against them by their religion, their sex, their race. And he's got guns. I'm worried that he might go do something. I mean, that's kind of where you get red flag laws already, which by and large not only are not effective, but they are a gross constitutional violation of basically having not a lot of information and stripping somebody of their fundamental freedom of the right to bear arms. Which I am a firm believer that the end part of the Second Amendment says the right that shall not be infringed. Like it's important for a reason. We've talked about a lot of those. But with my work and with a lot of the things I look into, legal standards are very important to me. It's a basis for kind of the way we operate in orderly in society, obviously. One of the most recent Supreme Court cases that I think everybody's probably aware of at this point is the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association v. Bruin. Which obviously there was an issue where New York required a person to show a special need for self-protection to receive an unrestricted license to carry a concealed firearm outside of their home in the city of New York. Or maybe it's the state of New York, not 100% sure. Does New York's... Yeah, their conclusion was that the proper cause requirement violated the 14th Amendment by preventing law-abiding citizens with ordinary self-defense needs from exercising their Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms in public for self-defense. So this is the Supreme Court evaluating this case after federal appellate courts taking review of it and determining, yes, everybody does have a right to not only keep and bear arms, but to carry them outside of their home in a self-defense capacity. And so there is a clear-cut legal standard there on a Supreme Court review that backs the Second Amendment of the Constitution, so it's not relying just upon the amendment. Something that's very solidly in stone because of obviously the lengthy process that it takes for an amendment to be overturned and repealed, or a new amendment to be created. Such a high burden to do that. You'll probably almost never get it to happen, because especially with the division in government nowadays. But with that legal standard that it's recognized that everybody, except for like these excluded people, like convicted felons and all that, it basically says that everybody has that right to carry it with them in a self-defense capacity outside of their home. And honestly, something that I always held was that you're a convicted felon, no gun for you. But as I get older, I start to think there's people that are convicted of felonies for
non-violent
tax evasion,
something like that. Offenders, yeah.
And that's my thing. I don't, because of such a strong backing with a constitutional right, I'm almost of the notion now, I think I would be comfortable with, if you were convicted of certain non-violent felonies, that you would not be prohibited from owning a firearm. And I think just convicted of any violent crime in general, of certain levels. Obviously, if you punch a dude in a bar fight, they shouldn't take your guns from you. But like
because you chose to use your fist and not your gun, so you're responsible.
Because I don't need these guns. But no, I think there are certain levels that violent crimes do rise to the level to where this person can no longer be trusted with having a firearm. I would be comfortable with that, because your actions have now prevented you from doing such, and you've been convicted by a jury of your peers. If you appeal it and you get it overturned, you can have your guns back. Whatever. Like, there's a legal process, we have to follow it. But that's my thing. I'll just end it on this. I agree with Tim on the whole culture, moral bankruptcy of society. I know I said it before. Obviously, this isn't going to resonate with everybody here or our listeners. Me personally, with my faith background, being a Christian, I think it's just part of how it is, with the removal of, faith from society, the breakdown of the family structure. I think there's a lot of people that are hurting and broken, that are seeking that elsewhere when they are in need of, honestly, savior or faith. That's my opinion on that. Does that help us in this scenario? It's one of those things where, man, I'll tell you, there's just not a good solution to this. And I hate to say that, like, you just do nothing about it, because I'm not saying there's not a solution. But at least all of the solutions pretty much that I've heard propose, the potential for abuse and of it to backlash upon law-abiding citizens is just far too great a risk to enact them.
That was really good, Spicer. I appreciate that. We are at final thoughts time.
Final thoughts, huh? Already?
I mean,
I-
final thoughts. We could easily do a part 2
I'm-
of this. I'll be
We
honest.
we could do a part 2 for sure, but yeah, it's
There's just so
actually that
much.
time. Yeah,
Yeah.
it actually kind of blows my mind, but yeah, we're there.
Yeah, I mean, we like I said, I want everyone to know they're listening that we all have different ideologies, different beliefs, and we're on different different
Wavelengths.
sides. Yeah, different sides of the same gradient. We're not always gonna see eye to eye on everything, Tim. But but here's the thing: this whole podcast, this whole idea of this is to have this differential thought. And even some of the stuff that I'm coming up with during the conversation, I wanted to kind of play devil's advocate and put in some ideas that I'm not always on the side of. Like, it's the stuff that we hear on one side or the other, and kind of putting them together in a platform where we can kind of pick them apart. For me personally, and this is where I'm gonna put my ideas on what I think is a combination of mental health and for me it's the access of guns to people that have mental health issues. And that's just, from me, I'm a moderate, so I'm going to look at both sides, and it's for me, it's hard for me to say it's one or the other. It's a combination of both for me, and I don't think we're going to find a solution on one end of the spectrum or the other. It's going to have to be two sides coming together in the middle and figuring out how we can use this as a combination to enact some change for the future, because something has to change. It's gotten too bad now. When you're numb to school shootings, and you're numb to children shooting their teachers, and numb to schools getting shot up, and churches and Bible studies and everything, it's just, that's not where you want to be as a society. And I mean, we are the leader of the free world. That is our position in this world, in this little blue ball that we call Earth. And at a certain point, I mean, the world's looking to us, and we're not looking too hot right now. So we got to figure something out. So that's where I'll leave it. I'll let you guys do your final thoughts as well.
Oh, I mean, I'm still pretty set for my final thought. My right to life, my right to defend my life should not be, I guess, taken away for a false sense of security. Because there's a sign on the door, won't stop a criminal from going in, committing a heinous crime. I should still be able to protect myself wherever I'm at, inside or outside of my home. As the Supreme Court has ruled that we do have the right to self-defense and carrying firearms outside of the home, except in, specific areas, as the federal government has also defined. I would fully support the states bringing back mental institutions as a permanent living facility. That's something that I could get behind 100%, right? I hate taxes. I do. But I understand that there are also those in society that should not be in society. It's not morally right to remove them from society. They still have the right to life, but as deemed by a court, and the precedence is set through every hearing and court case before, with as limited political bias as possible. I think that state institutions could have prevented a lot of today's crime, not just mass shootings. I also think that the availability to get help should be 100% doors open, without the constant nagging threat that they're going to come to your home and take your guns away. Just because someone suffers from PTSD, depression, anxiety, other forms of controllable mental health issues, does not mean that they will be a threat to themselves or others. Sometimes somebody just needs someone to talk to. And unfortunately, because the way that, again, society is, that's not always an option. You know, and I think that's completely unfortunate. I think that these resources should be free. That's another thing that I would fully back taxable support for, is to make sure that someone who needs help gets help without any type of ramification. If it comes to be that they are a danger to themselves or others, there should be pathways for that. But because someone's a danger to themselves or others should not prevent those who are not from the means to defend themselves legally. I guess that's where I'll kind of wrap up there.
I'm going to surrender a majority of my final thought time. I just don't want people to believe in the misinformation that, you know, we all hear now that's in the news, right? About how it's easy to find a gun or grab a gun or whatever. It's just not how it is. So I'm going to double down on that. Don't believe everything you hear in the news or from social media influencers. And go green, go white. That's all I got to say.
All right, I guess I'm last. So my little last bit is um no, I very much agree with what Tim and Raj have said about mental health. Having sought mental health resources in my past and it being a very negative experience. I believe there needs to be a lot of reworking of that, whether it is institutions, more government aid, or government rework and oversight of that system. And I agree, you know, if I can take a couple dollars out of my paycheck and make sure somebody has somebody to talk to, I'm okay with that. And then when it comes to gun control laws and things like that, I think it's a very slippery slope. I think kind of where you draw the line will always change because people always want to push that level one way or the other. I very much agree with the previous assurances that Michael talked about. If you came to the table with a huge thing for a lot of some good changes. In the end, I think unity as a whole of thought bring about a lot of good things.
Oh, and I guess even though I was the last one to mainly speak, I'll throw in my last couple thoughts here.
My bad.
Yeah, he kind of forgot me. That's okay. I'll really go last now. Yeah, I mean, I kind of spewed out most of where I was at on all of that. My final thoughts again just kind of come down to, you know, with the legal standards and the rights and the people of this country, at a time where we have a lot of people saying that the government isn't good at doing its job, that they're corrupt, there's corruption in the government, whether it be a municipal level, the police force, the federal government, you know, right, wrong, or indifferent. I'm not saying that, you know, that's always the case, but if that's the general sentiment, but then the same people are going out and saying, well, we need to ban this gun, or we need to restrict people's access to guns, or ban guns. To me, the only logical road you can go down is that you're saying the only people left who are going to have the guns are the very people that you say are too corrupt to be trusted with that kind of authority. And it really just kind of leads to, in my mind, this almost dystopian setting of where the people in authority are the only ones left with the means to defend themselves, and the average citizen has been stripped of the ability, or at least a lot of the ability, to do that with heavy restrictions. That's not something I want to see happen again. Like I said, with some of the statistics I pointed out, I think the good uses of firearms vastly outweigh the negative. It's always hard to deal with tragedies that happen. I'm not saying there isn't some kind of solution down the road. I just haven't seen one that's fitting yet that I think would actually make a tangible difference. Most of them, I think, are like a lot of the firearms laws we have on the books right now. They've overcomplicated the bureaucracy of it without having actual real effect on any kind of safety or benefit to society. And honestly, I think the biggest thing is just having compassion for people and getting back to watching out for each other and just loving your neighbor, man. Just trying to be better in general. I don't. That me saying that's not going to fix it, but that's just what I feel, man. We've got to be better as a society about just being better, and that's going to take a lot of effort, and it's going to show itself in a lot of ways, but we got to try.
Okay. Well, normally this is the part where I would promote us and say we're doing a good job. We are doing a good job.
Or Shane Raj.
But what?
I said, or you'd shame Raj.
Or I'd shame Raj. But we are doing a good job. We continue to grow. And we continue to have relatively steady traffic. So I'm not gonna do a bunch of crazy stuff today. Just if you like what we're saying, blast it out to your friends, family, anybody. And yeah, the more you get us out there, the more that we can do for you. So as always, stay ordinary, my friends.
As always, everyone, thank you so much for listening to this episode of Drunk with Questions.
Drunk with Questions wouldn't be possible without incredibly ordinary individuals such as yourselves. Make sure you join the Drunk with Questions crew every Sunday on your preferred podcast streaming website. Don't forget to like, follow, comment, and subscribe on all of our social media pages. And feel free to reach out to us by email at any time.